Welcome to Step by Step STEM. Today, I'm going to be showing you how to do percentages easily and even in your head. So, have you ever been at the store and there's a sale, but it doesn't show what the sale price is? It just says that whatever items in this area that you see are 40% off. And you find this really nice sweater that's $80. And it's 40% off though, but you don't really know what that is, so you pull out your calculator to figure it out. Well, I'm going to show you that you don't need to do that anymore. You could just do it in your head. So, to start, I like to break it up into smaller percentages and then multiply it out. I'll show you what I mean. So, to find 40% of 80, keep in mind you can do this in your head, but I'm just writing it out. First, I would find 10% of 80. So 10% of 80 equals 8. And we know that because it's basic math. 80 divided by 10 is 8. So once we know that 10% of 80 is 8, now we can easily find 40%. So 10% goes into 40% 4 times. So we have to multiply this by 4. So 8 times 4 equals 32. And now we know that 40% of 80 is 32. And for the example of a sale, now what you would have to do is 80 minus 32, which equals 48. So this means that our sweater would be $48. I'm going to show you another way to do this. So for the same example, 40% off of $80, what you could think of is, since we're getting 40% off, then we're paying 60% of the price. So we could find 60% of 80 instead of doing any subtraction. And once again, we follow the same steps. 10% equals 8. 8 times 6 equals 48. And what do you know? We got the same answer. So if you see a sweater that's 40% off, that's usually $80, it's now going to be $48. Now let's get into a different example. Forget about the sales. We just have, what is 5% of 80? You might be thinking in your head one day, for some reason, what is 5% of 80? Now, we can follow the same idea or bring in a new idea. Both ideas will lead us to the answer. So, once again, we can do 10% of 80 equals 8, and divided by 2, since 10% divided by 2 is 5%, we have 4, and that's our answer. So 5% of 80 is 4. All you have to do is break it down into smaller / easier percentages. I say / easier because 10% isn't smaller than 5%, but it is easier to think about versus just flat out trying to think about what's 5% of 80. But I'll show you another method now, which will help us in the next example. So instead of finding 10%, we can find 1%. And if you don't know how to find 1%, you could find 10% first. So 10% equals 8. That means 1% equals 0.8. Once again, we're just dividing by 10. And then simply multiply 0.8 times 5, and we get 4. So as you can see, we got the same answer using both methods, but breaking it down to 1% will help us more often. Alright, we're here with the next example. So now we have 7% of 80. And see, 7 isn't a nice number that we can break from 10% or 5%, so we're going to have to go to 1%. So to get to 1%, we can do 10%. 10% of 80 is 8. So then we know 1% equals 0.8. That's just dividing by 10 again, or moving the decimal over 1. And then once we know 1%, we can easily find 7% by multiplying 1% times 7. You can look at it this way, multiply both sides by 7. So then 0.8 times 7, you're like, I don't know how to do that in my head. Well, it's just 8 times 7 and then move the decimal over again. So 8 times 7 is 56. So we have 5.6 as our answer. Go ahead and check that in your calculator. I think you guys are getting the point now, so we'll head on to our final example. Now this one looks tricky, and you might not be able to do it completely in your head, but you probably could at the same time. But we got 37.8% of 80, so let's see how to do that. So we're going to look at the tens column, the ones column, and the decimal. So for the tens, we need 10%. 10% of 80 equals 8. And we know we're going to have to multiply that by 3 to get to 30%. So 8 times 3 equals 24. Now we move on to the ones column. 1% equals 0.8. We know that now. And we don't need 1% though, we need 7%. So multiply both sides by 7. And we get 0.8 times 7 equals 5.6. We know that. Now, 0.1% equals 0.08. And then we multiply that by 8. Multiply both sides by 8. 0.08 times 8 equals 0.64. And then we add all of our answers together. 24 plus 5.6 plus 0.64. And this all equals 30.24. Now, just to double check that I'm not lying to you, go ahead and multiply 80 by 37.8% in your calculator right now. I'll do it with you. 80 times 0.378, and yes, we in fact get 30.24. So, if this video helped you learn how to do percentages in your head, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys again soon.